Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of ProtoPilot. In this week's episode, we're going to be building the famous pull to refresh design pattern for mobile. So I'm just going to give you a quick demo of what we're going to be building. We're going to be building it into this fake app that I created for my Udemy course Total ProtoPie, currently available on Udemy by the way. And we're going to add the pull to refresh into the photo stream, which is part of the home screen of that fake app. So if we look at the preview window here, so I've got my photo stream here, and if I just scroll to the top, and as I pull down, I get this little icon that just rotates round. When I let go, I get this fake cervical, so this little spinner happening, and you can see two images just loaded in. So I've got my new content in here and I can carry on browsing my pies as per usual. So this is what we're going to be building in this week's episode. So let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is import our graphics. So I created this particular prototype graphics inside of Adobe XD. So we're going to be using Adobe XD for this particular episode. And you can see here on screen, I've got XD on the right hand side, and I've got my starter file, so basically just a blank ProtoPie file here on the left hand side. And we're going to be using the shiny brand new Adobe XD exporter that ProtoPie have created. So this is a new plugin that you can install into Adobe XD, and this gives you a lot more granular control over how you're able to import your graphics from XD directly into ProtoPie. Okay, so I've already installed the plugin, so I'm just going to come down to the plugins panel here inside of XD, and you can see I've got my ProtoPie plugin here just ready to go, and it's asking me to select artboards or layers to export. So I'm just going to select the whole artboard here, and you can see a little thumbnail has just appeared here, so I'm just going to tap export. And you can see over here on the left hand side, we've got our screen just loading into ProtoPie. You can see the import has been successful, and it's done a really good job of importing all of the graphics, and it's mapped certain types from XD to ProtoPie. So things like the photo stream, which was a scrolling list. I used a scrolling list in XD, and that's mapped directly to a scrolling list, a scrolling container inside of ProtoPie. So, and all of my groups and all of the graphics have been brought in as SVGs, and all the groups are nested and all that cool stuff. So yeah, really good to finally have a export plugin for Adobe XD. We've already got one previously for Figma, and ProtoPie are now working on their plugin for Sketch. So soon we will have a fully featured exporting plugin for all three of the main UI creation tools. Okay, so we've now got our graphics imported into ProtoPie. In the next part, we're going to create our first bit of interaction, where we're going to be creating the refresh icon. So see you there. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to create is the refresh icon. So that's the icon that appears with the arrow in it, and the arrow spins around as I pull down. So the first thing I'm going to do to create that is I'm going to come over to my triggers panel, and I'm going to add a chain trigger. Okay, and we're going to target the photo stream scrollable group here. So let me just type photo stream. And the property we want to chain to is the photo stream scroll property. So we're just going to choose scroll from the properties list just below here. Okay, so that's our chain set up. Now what we want to chain to, so we're going to first add a move trigger, sorry, a move response. And within this move response, we want to target the refresh icon. So let's just type refresh icon, so this refresh icon group here. And you can see, as per everything that you do within Chain, you get this special kind of range panel that you need to fill out. So on the left hand side, we want to define the range of motion that we want to map to, we want to chain to of the scroll of photo stream. And that range is going to be from 0 to -50. Remembering that scroll views move in the opposite direction. So normally on your artboard, 0 will be up here and a higher number will be below. But when you're using a scroll view, it's reversed. So that's why we're going from 0 to -50. Okay. And we want to map the scroll to the move icon's Y position. So we're going to start the Y position at 40. And we're going to animate it to a Y position of 100. Okay. So that's going to actually just move the icon. So if we come over to our preview window here, we can see we've got our icon now changed to the scroll position and it's just moving down. Okay, cool. So the next thing we want to do is we want to rotate the arrow. So we want to add a rotate response. Okay, there it is. And this time we're going to target the arrow. So that's the icon inside. So let's type arrow. Okay. And for the arrow, we want to, we don't want the arrow to start rotating immediately. We want it to start rotating just before we reach the -50, so you can see it on screen, because obviously it's kind of sitting behind this category scrolling list here. So we're going to use the same range effectively, but we're going to make it much shorter. So we're going to start it at -40 to -50. Remember, we went from 0 to -50, so we're just going to use the last 10 pixels to drive our rotate. And on the right hand side, we're going to rotate. Now we're going to rotate from 180 to 0. And let me just explain why that is. If we go into our refresh icon here and we look at this arrow group, we can see it's already got an angle of 180, and that's because I had already rotated it inside of XD. So we actually want to go from 180 to 0. So that's why it's reversed. If you'd actually drawn your arrow the right way around, then obviously you'd go from 0 to 180. Okay, so let's just give that a test. Come over to my preview window here, and as I drag down, my arrow appears, and in the last 10 pixels, it just does that rotate. Okay, cool. So this completes the second part and completes the creation of the refresh icon. See you in the next part. Okay, so next up, we're going to focus on setting up the spinner graphic. So to do that, we're going to come over to our triggers panel and we're going to add a touch up trigger. Okay, and we're going to target our photo stream. And to this touch up trigger, we're going to add a condition. And within this condition, we want to target the photo stream's scroll position, scroll property. And we want to look for when it's less than -50. Okay, so within this condition, we're going to add an opacity response. We're going to target the refresh icon. So the first thing we want to do is we want to hide the refresh icon. So we're just going to turn its opacity down to 0, and we're going to have that happen immediately. So let's change that duration to 0. Okay, next up, we're going to add another opacity. This time we're going to target the spinner. And we want to target, I'm targeting the group. I've got a spinner group, and inside we've got an SVG called spinner as well. So I want to target the group in this particular instance. And I want to show that, so I'm going to turn that up to 100. And again, I want that to show immediately, so I'm going to set the duration to 0. Okay, so next up, I just want to come over to my spinner group here, and I just want to twizzle that down, and I just want to find that spinner SVG. And because I want this to spin on its axis, I actually need to set the origin to center here. Okay, let's come back to our condition. I'm going to add a rotate response, just a 2D rotate here. And I've already selected my spinner, so I want to make sure that that's targeted. and I'm going to rotate it by 360 degrees. So I want a full circular rotation, and I'm going to set the duration to 2 seconds. And I want this to be a repeating animation, so I'm going to check the repeat option here. And I'm going to repeat it twice. And I'm going to set the interval to 0. So the interval is time between each count. So each rotation, it would effectively stop for that interval. So I want it to be continuous, so I want to make sure that's 0. Okay. And finally, I want to set the easing to linear. And that's just because I want the animation to be continuous. If there's any easing in there, it's going to like slow down and speed up, and we don't really want that. Okay, next up, I'm going to add a move response. And I'm going to target the photo stream again. And I'm going to move it to a Y position of 150. And I'm going to set the easing to ease out with a duration of 0.4. Now, before we show this, let me just turn this move off for a second so I can show you why we're adding it. So if we come over to the preview window here, if I drag down on my scroll and we see we've got the original animation, if I let go, you see I've got the spinner, but my scroll is still sitting underneath it, and I want to have a nice white space between the spinner and the content. So that's why I've added this move. So let's just turn that move back on, and then let's just re-preview to show the difference. So I pull, I let go, and now you can see you've got a nice white space between the spinner and the content. Okay, so this wraps up part 3 of setting up the spinner. If you want to join me in the next part, then we're going to be working on hiding the spinner and then showing our content loaded from the server. So see you there. Okay, so next we're going to work on the interactions to hide the spinner. So the first thing we want to do is we want to come over to our touch up trigger, and we're going to add an opacity response. And we're going to target the spinner group. We're going to set the opacity to 0. Duration also we're going to set to 0. And we're going to set the delay to 2. So we want to match this 2-second delay which we're using to mimic the server delay. Okay, so let's just test that, see what that looks like. So I come over to my preview window and I'm going to let go, and it's going to spin for 2 seconds and it's going to disappear. So that's looking good. Okay, so next up we're going to work on the actual loading of the content. So the first part of that is going to be the moving of the existing content. So we're going to we need to do a little bit of work to prep our photo stream. So we're just going to twizzle down the photo stream, and we've got these 14 images. We're going to group image 14 and image 13. So these 2 images are actually the new content. So we're just going to group those together, and we're going to call this container new content. Okay, and we're just going to turn the opacity down to 0. We want to hide these 2 images away. Then we're going to grab the rest of the images and we're going to group those also. And we're going to rename this existing content. Okay, so we've got our 2 groups of images. We're going to keep existing content selected. And we're going to add a move trigger. Sorry, a move response. And we're going to choose move by, and we're going to change the Y position to 192. So we're going to move it by 192, which just happens to be the right distance to allow room for the new content to come in. And we're going to leave the duration at 0.2, but we're going to delay it again by 2 seconds. Again, we want to delay it to account for this fake server load that we've created. Okay, so that about rounds off the creation of moving the existing content. Okay, so next up we want to load the new content. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our new content group. We're going to add an opacity response. And we're going to set the opacity to 100. And we're going to select the delay, set the delay to 2.4. So just a little bit longer than the 2 seconds, allow time for the spinner to disappear and just have a little bit of a pause, and then we're going to bring the new content in. Okay, so that sorts that out. Okay, so let's just give that a test, see what we've got. So we're going to come over to our preview window. I'm going to drag down, load the content, and there we go. We've moved the existing content down and we've loaded the new content in. Okay, so that's looking pretty good, but you'll notice there's like a bigger gap here than was before because we've moved our whole container, the actual photo stream container, we've moved it down by 50 pixels. So we just need to reset that. So we're going to do that now. We're going to reset the photo stream container position. Okay, so let's target our photo stream. Let's select that in the list. And we're going to add a move trigger. And we're just going to choose move by again, and we're going to, in the Y, we're going to move it by -50. So effectively, we're going to reset it back to its original position. And the only other thing we need to do is need to also delay it by 2 seconds. We want to keep to this delay. Okay, let's give that a whirl and see what we got. So we'll load the content in. It's going to pause. And you'll see, actually, you didn't even notice that the container had moved because there was so much more going on, and it's now loaded in the correct position. So that's looking good. Okay, so that's pretty much the crux of the feature. But if we just play around with preview for a little while, and we'll scroll up and down, and we'll come here and we'll load the content in, and that's all working pretty nicely. But then if we continue to use the prototype and we come back, we can see that this is still loading, but now it's created this weird gap in the middle. So the way we've got our prototype set up is we've only got these two images to load. So we want to basically stop any new content being loaded. And the way we're going to do this is what we're going to look into in the next section. Okay, so you've made it to the end of the session. We've just got one more thing to do. Which is to just deal with this multiple loading. We just want to make sure that we only load our content once. So the way we're going to do this is we're actually going to use some variables. We're going to use a variable. We're going to open up our variables panel, and we're going to add a variable. And we're just going to use a variable for this scene. That's going to be fine. And we're going to call this variable loaded. And we want this to be a number variable, and that's what we get by default. So that's cool. And we're going to come over to our touch up trigger, and we're going to add an assign response. We're going to choose our newly created loaded variable. And we're going to, in the formula input, we're going to set the formula to 1. So this is going to be what's known as a Boolean variable. So it's going to have a value of 0 or 1, and we're just going to use those two values to drive certain behaviors. Okay, so we need to add some conditions. So we're going to go back to our chain trigger, and we're going to add a condition. And this condition is going to be looking at our loaded variable and seeing if it's equal to 0. And we just need to move our two responses into the condition. So I'm just going to shift select those and just drag them into the condition. There you go. Okay, so that's the first area where we need to add this condition. We need to add it in another location. So we need to go back to our original touch-up condition where we've already got a condition 1. We need to add a second condition here. And we're also going to add exactly the same condition. We're going to choose our loaded variable, and we're going to look to see if it is equal to 0. And if it's equal to 0, then it's not going to run. So basically what's happening here is that we're going to drag our scroll view down. It's going to hit this condition, and it's going to say if the photo stream scroll is less than 50 and loaded equals 0, i.e. we haven't loaded the content yet, because 0 means we haven't loaded the content yet, 1 means we have. It's going to run all this stuff. But right at the bottom, we've got this assign response, which is going to assign a value of 1 to loaded. And as soon as loaded gets 1, we know that the content has been loaded, and it's going to stop these two conditions from running. Okay, so let's give that a whirl and see if that works. So here I am in my new prototype, and I'm going to pull to refresh, get my new content, load it in, carry on using it. If I go back to the top and I pull to refresh, I get absolutely nothing. It just works the same as it would if there's no new content. Okay, so that about wraps up our session on looking at how you might create the pull to refresh interaction pattern for mobile. Just one of the things I wanted to mention, and this might be something that some of you might have you kind of like originally thought, oh, he's going to be using the pull trigger. So if I just tap on the trigger panel here, you can see there's a pull trigger here, and the pull trigger was actually designed to do pull trigger things. Unfortunately, and I did try this out, I did try to create this pattern with the pull trigger initially, and the problem with the pull trigger is that it actually moves the object. So when you've got a scroll view, that itself, as you know, has a scrollable aspect to it. The pull trigger also has a scrollable aspect to it, but it's added to the whole group itself. So you get this weird situation where you're pulling the scroll view, but you're pulling the main view, and it all kind of like gets in the way of actually achieving the effects that you want. The pull trigger would be really good for something like, you know, swipe left to, like in iOS, where you have the ability to say delete emails, and you can swipe left to reveal the wastebasket icon, and then you can do it like that. But for pull to refresh, the pull trigger isn't really that useful, and it's much easier to do it this way. So yeah, I mean, that's why I did try to use the pull trigger. I decided it wasn't the best use case for it, ironically, and this was the best way to do it. So hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you've enjoyed the video and you've been liking the other videos on the channel, then please subscribe. That would really help me out. And if you like this video in particular, then please give it a like. That'll help, you know, spread the word, get more ProtoPie out to people, and help them find the content. So yeah, really appreciate if you can do those two things. And this brings us to the end of this particular episode for this week, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Take it easy.